We have been talking about the Clarity Act for quite some time, basically being the key that unlocks the floodgates. And yeah, when we think about the big banks, all of the institutional players, and pretty much all of the, bullish news that we have been talking about, pretty much all of that gets exaggerated in a huge way once we have the Clarity Act fully passed through. And what I really mean by that is everything starts to come true regarding all of the speculation, all of the ideas around Ripple and XRP, everything that we've talked about around utility-based assets for years and years and years. All of that finally starts to become, a true thing. Because again, like all of that stuff, we have been waiting for clarity, aka regulations, to unlock all of those bullish things. So when we start to see things like this post here from CoinDesk, which is new, JP Morgan says the Clarity Act could be the catalyst crypto needs, with a clear regulatory framework potentially unlocking institutional capital and driving a significant upside move in the second half of 2026. When we see things like this, although it's hard to agree with JP Morgan, you kind of have to, because again, when we take a step back, think about the most bullish catalyst for XRP. It's banks utilizing the XRP ledger, tapping into XRP, and ultimately saying, hey, this is going to be our new infrastructure, if you will, for the future financial system. When something like that gets announced, when a bank starts to utilize a public network to move, hundreds of billions, possibly even trillions of dollars, yeah, that's a massive catalyst. But that does not happen without clarity. So this is why we have been putting a spotlight on the Clarity Act and regulations for such a long time. Now, I will say I do think that there is a little bit of theater going on here, and we'll get to that here in a moment. But I do want to go over here real quick to this post from Cryptos R Us. This goes back to roughly like the middle of February, where we did hear from, Bitwise regarding a bank that just went from zero to full speed on crypto. We have here, this is happening faster than people think. Hunter Horsley says a major U.S. bank went from zero to full speed on crypto in just months. One exec with 25 years at the bank told him the leadership team has gone from 0 to 500 miles per hour on crypto education and rollout. Banks don't move like that ever. Horsley said that he's hearing the same thing across the industry. 2/3 of financial institutions could be in crypto within 6 months. Over half of fintechs and neobanks are moving in now. Regardless of ideology, crypto is being positioned as a mainstream asset class and store of value, with billions of users eventually touching it. This is a massive statement. Check this out.
There's a very large bank in America that had us do an education session just a month or two ago for some of their wealth managers in New York City. We had an executive there who's been there for 25 years speak. He said in the last 2 months, the executive team at the bank has gone from 0 to 500 miles an hour on crypto. Banks don't go from 0 to 500 miles an hour on anything. I've spoken with a number of CEOs and presidents and a few chairmen of banks. It's all happening right now. 2/3 of all financial institutions will be in crypto in the next 6 months. I think that over half of all fintechs and neobanks will be in crypto. So I think that the whole thing is getting wired up, connected. And that's important for the space because I think regardless of the specifics of what people's aspirations are for crypto, I think the general aspiration is that it gets adopted as a mainstream store of value, a mainstream asset class, new set of rails, and that billions of people use it.
So yeah, listen, when we are hearing talks like this coming from, Bitwise, we need to start listening up because, again, yeah, we are starting to see institutional players starting to take crypto extremely serious. I think at this point, in this market, crypto is becoming legitimized. It's becoming that mature asset class that the biggest players in the world are now starting to look at. This is at the same exact time that it feels as though retail is just completely gone. Like they gave up completely on crypto, but the biggest players, the largest names in TradFi, they are not giving up, which should also open your eyes to just how big this space will be very, very soon. And again, I do think that most of retail will miss out completely. But let's go over here real quick to this post because this is a new update and this is a massive name. Morgan Stanley applies for National Trust Bank charter to allow the Wall Street Bank to custody Bitcoin and crypto assets. This is from Bloomberg. We have over here, Morgan Stanley has filed for a national trust bank charter to custody crypto and potentially offer staking. 18 million clients, 9.3 trillion in assets, and prior statements already flagging XRP as a swift alternative. Yeah, some of the biggest names in TradFi are starting to move quickly on chain. But I really do think that, when we think about what's going to happen next, this is exactly the next move, which is Morgan Stanley and Vanguard and some of the largest names in TradFi filing for applications to offer specific crypto, services to their client list. And when we think about Morgan Stanley, 18 million clients, that's not a small number at all. That's 18 million fresh clients potentially moving into the crypto space, not to mention the 9.3 trillion in assets. Now, on top of this, remember what Reese Merrick recently said. This is a Ripple employee. This goes back to the end of January. I spent yesterday in a boardroom with 20 plus executive and non-executive bank directors, diving deep into the evolution of the market. What was originally scheduled as a 30-minute long session quickly turned into a 90-minute session of discussion, seeing a unanimous row of nodding heads when discussing the shift towards digital asset payments, and the massive upside of tokenization was the ultimate validation. To be honest, I walked in expecting a little skepticism and a barrage of tough questions. Instead, the consensus was overwhelmingly positive. The conversation has officially shifted from why to how. And yeah, the institutional players now want to know how to tap in, how to utilize this technology in a big way, because they realize that this is the next major advancement around tech and around finance, you name it. Now, let's go back to the drawing board here. You guys probably remember that post from the video from yesterday. This was the post from Sandra Lutz. I don't think that I need to read it. I could just kind of summarize it. Basically, the Clarity Act got delayed because bankers don't want to give up control. Coinbase and crypto firms are still getting the, blame for this. But again, it seems as though there's pretty much a near zero chance that we could get a passage next month, aka March. Now, to build on top of this, we did get a big update. And that's from Eleanor Terrell. We have lots of crypto industry folks jumping to the defense of Patrick J. Witt and the White House following comments from an unnamed source claimed to be directly involved in the stablecoin yield talks. I shared the post and the crypto Twitter reaction with a banking side source who has direct knowledge of the negotiations. They said that the bank trade representatives from ABA Bankers, ICBA, and also Bank Policy who attended last week's White House meeting were perplexed by the characterization and do not share the unnamed source's views and have already relayed that to the White House. Additionally, they're unsure why the individual characterized the situation in such nihilistic terms, noting that both sides are still giving input on text and aren't necessarily living or dying by the March 1st deadline. So again, it's kind of like a back and forth battle on, what's going to happen next. This is why I said this is basically a theater going on. This is a, big play that everyone's following. I ultimately think that this is just, all noise. I think that they already have this planned. I think that everyone's playing their role. I even think that Coinbase is playing a role here. So again, it's just ridiculous that this is still ongoing. However, we did get a huge comment from Brad Garlinghouse. So let's go over here real quick. This is from David Sachs. He said, Patrick J. Witt is doing an amazing job brokering a compromise between the banks and crypto industry. No one is working harder to get market structure legislation across the finish line. By the way, crypto has made major concessions on stablecoin yield. It's time for banks to reciprocate. So again, even when we go back to Coinbase being the problem here or crypto firms, they already started to, work out a deal. They already started to compromise a bit. Now it's banks that are holding this back. They're not compromising. They're not trying to make a deal. This is the biggest issue here. Now, we did see Brad Garlinghouse say the door to a deal is wide open. The banks just need to act in good faith and walk through it. However, let's take a step back real quick. When have the banks ever acted in good faith? It's crazy that we still have this battle ongoing here for crypto clarity. Obviously, the main thing that I'm looking at here is if this is all one big show, if this is all a theater, if they're all just holding this back, they're pre-planned, they already know exactly when the deadline for this is. Let's be honest here. When we think about the SEC lawsuit with Ripple, when we think about everything that's happened, over the years with Operation Choke Point 2.0 and all that, like, how crazy would it be for this to already have been decided? And right now we're just watching this back and forth battle between, banks and crypto firms. I mean, I just think that this is all one big show. I think that it's all noise. I think that it's a theater. I think that, we're starting to see a stall on the industry so that the big players can start to prepare. I think that that's where we start to go back to already some of the big names jumping into the space, already preparing a few products. We already know that the Fed is on board. We already know that the FDIC is on board. The OCC is on board. Like, every single big name is starting to move in at a time when this is all getting stalled. Again, this is why I think that it's all one big show. I think that it's already planned ahead of time. It's very similar to like the SEC lawsuit against Ripple. I talked about it many times over how, we're starting to see all of these big announcements with Ripple, but they're still in the middle of a lawsuit, right? Make it make sense. Like, we saw Ripple join the BISSC PMI group. We started to see Ripple working with, the CFTC closely. Like, it just felt as if Ripple already won that lawsuit 2-3 years before it actually happened. So again, I think that the same thing is happening here. Now, do I think that the bankers are a big problem? Yeah, I've been talking about it. And what's funny about this? We did see a post from Neatsbucks on X. He said, since banks can't actually write or vote on a bill, why don't politicians simply vote in their constituents' best interest and ignore lobbyists? Oh, that's right, because these banks own much of Congress and have held crypto back for 17 years. Guys, I've been saying this for so long. I know that this is like a back and forth battle here between the banks and crypto firms. However, when we think about what's going on here, I said here, but Coinbase, because everyone has been talking about Coinbase. I said people are so blind to the biggest issue here, and it really shows their time spent in this market. Banks have been openly attacking crypto for over 10 plus years, using politicians whose campaigns they funded as their weapons. And yeah, they have been doing this for so long. We go back to even the SEC chairman. Majority of them went over to, competing firms that were, attacking assets that were in a lawsuit. Like, it's all, back and forth battle between, those that have interest in this space or beyond this space that want to see this space fail, or they want to get control over the space. Banks are the biggest problem though, because again, bankers have for the longest time funded politicians, campaigns. They basically buy them and then they can control them. When I look at Congress, I just look at a ton of, puppets essentially. So that's why a lot of these bills, that's why all of this entire process, in my opinion, is just all one big show. I think that this is already planned ahead. I think that this is already decided. And I think that, it's just all manipulation to hold this market back a bit so that the biggest players can prepare. It's the same thing around like the XRP SEC lawsuit. I said it many times over, and I know that a lot of other people have said it too. They basically said that, this lawsuit was to hold things back so that the biggest players can buy up XRP, jump into XRP, plan ahead with Ripple. And I think that that is true. And I think that the same thing is happening here, except it's on a much larger scale beyond Ripple and even beyond XRP. But this case is definitely, this bill is definitely a big one. I think that it's even bigger than the case because of what it will lead to. Just like, Brad is saying here, yeah, the door is open. Banks just need to act in good faith and walk through it. But you know how stubborn these bankers are. But the bill is so important. I would love to see this happen before the second half of 2026. Number one, because I do think that it would cause 2026 to be a massive year for crypto. Number two, it would be ahead of midterms so that we would avoid all of that, nonsense with a change of Congress, and then all of a sudden a back and forth again on the bill, rewriting the bill. I mean, it's just going to be a much longer process that will possibly push us into 2027, maybe even 2028. So let's see what happens here. I would love for JP Morgan to be correct here and have this bill signed into law by the second half of 2026. I do think that's a massive catalyst, and I'm very excited to get this, fully done. But it's questionable on if that's going to happen or not. So with that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video.